Today, we're taking a trip down memory lane and giving players who haven't before received the recognition they deserve what's rightfully theirs. Namely, credit for being some of the best players this game has ever seen. But unfortunately for them, their names haven't often been discussed in that setting for one reason or another. If you at any point disagree with any of my picks throughout these 29 seasons, then better suggestions for underrated players are always welcome in the comment section below. We will of course begin all of this by talking about Season 1. During Season 1, one name stood out heavily as the most underrated player in terms of skill, and that name was High Distortion. In Season 1, whilst the majority of players were shaking in their final 1v1s of solo games, High Distortion was consistently winning solo squad games and dropping higher elims in said games than almost anyone else in the world, all whilst being ice cold with no nerves at all. Now, after Season 1, HD was able to build a very big community. His Twitch was blowing up, getting thousands of new followers every day, and the same could be said for his YouTube. And as a result of this opportunity, High Distortion ended up focusing exclusively on content creation. And in the seasons following, improving his individual skill would not be anywhere near a priority. Something that in hindsight is quite sad given just how much potential HD had in the early days of the game. Moving on to Season 2, I have a pick that only the OGs watching will understand. And that pick is Cypher PK. Nowadays, there's no denying that Cypher isn't anywhere near the top in terms of what is possible competitively in Fortnite. But during Season 2, Cypher was able to climb his way up to 15th place on the global wins leaderboards, all whilst being extremely creative in the way he played. You see, Cypher was known at this time for being the inventor of trap towers, and him consistently using traps to outplace opponents would, in the following months, lead a lot of players to adapt traps into their playstyles and attempt to master them. Cypher, believe it or not, is one of the players and content creators who has had the biggest impact on the development of competitive play, especially if we're talking in the first few months of the game's release. And someone giving him some well-deserved credit for what he did back in the day is about time. Going into Season 3, things start to become really interesting, as this was the season where the second ever somewhat serious LAN event was hosted. This LAN event was called Lyon Esport 2018 and was hosted in the country of France. And one of the 4 winners of this tournament was by far the most underrated player of Season 3 as well. His name is Kinstar. If you're from any other country than France, chances are you haven't heard about Kinstar. So let me tell you a little bit about him. Kinstar ended 2018 second place on the PR leaderboards for Europe, just under Metro. PR, if you don't know, is a score given to you based on how well you perform in tournaments. This 2018 placement really emphasized just how amazing of a player Kinstar was in Season 3. And I bet most of you guys, apart from every French player watching, either haven't heard about him or maybe you've just forgotten him as so much time have passed by. Next up, we have Season 4. Season 4 of Fortnite was an amazing time. This season started the summer holiday for most back in 2018, and people were ready to grind it out. And the most underrated player back then, Blind, was no different. Now, this is the most unknown player on this entire list, but back at the start of Fortnite, he was insane. In Ninja Las Vegas 2018, which was also one of the first LAN tournaments ever hosted, he was able to win the first 2 games and win the entire event, where he took home $7,500. Unfortunately, Blind's competitive career was short-lived due to how he strongly disliked how toxic the community was becoming. He was able to participate in a few of the summer and fall skirmish weeks after his early success in Seasons 3 and 4, but then quickly after fell out of love with the game, and maybe understandably so, considering he had made over $130,000 for himself through his impressive skirmish performances. Another player who had inhuman skirmish performances was Vivid, and during Season 5, he was the most underrated player in the world. In hindsight, it's hard to think of Vivid as someone underrated, as he quickly became someone often discussed in talks about who the best player in the world was after the summer skirmish. He was one of the first in the world to understand things about the game nobody else quite understood. The importance of having loot routes, rotating early, and the pros and cons of playing the different layers in endgames were all things that came naturally to Vivid. And as a result, he made over $400,000 in his time playing Fortnite. A player who never quite reached 400k in earnings, but got super close, was Vinny1x, the most underrated player of Season 6. Vinny1x is probably mostly known today for being Sexrow's faithful duo. Back in Season 6, he was without a shadow of a doubt the most underrated player ever, and in my eyes, he will go down in history as one of the best teammates in competitive Fortnite's 6+ year lifespan. Although his strength as a player was definitely in duos, he was able to win a solo LAN event called the ESL Katowice Royale back in 2019, where he took home $20,000 over the likes of other top-tier professional players like Kinstar, Bizzle, and Mitro, really showcasing just how good of a player he really was. Since we're on the topic of phenomenal teammates, it doesn't get better than Elevate. Not only did he have one of the most improvement-driven mentalities back in the day, but he was also by far one of the most humble professional players. During Season 7, we didn't have a lot of tournaments, but we did have a LAN event, forgotten by everyone other than the OGs, called the WSOE, where, you guessed it, Season Elevate took home the trophy and also 20 grand each. If you're a true OG, you'll remember Elevate actually being one of the first ever players to make how-to videos on competitive related topics. He made some classics like how to professionally rotate and how to push high ground. If you watched these videos back in the day, then chances are astronomical that you're a pro player today. In the season after, in Season 8, a player by the name Saf really started to wow parts of the competitive community because of his unbelievable shotgun aim. The difference between him and many others was how he was able to always hit these max damages in stacked tournament games, where everyone's FPS was far from consistent, and the server performance back then was also definitely nothing to brag about. Saf was far ahead of the curve because he was focusing on improving his aim specifically through training with a newly released game called Kovacs. In addition to the aim practice, he was of course also grinding scrims against other competitive hungry players. And it was at the end of Season 8 that Saf would change his entire life by winning the second duo qualifier and punching in his ticket to the New York World Cup Finals, where he would take home $750,000 individually and $1.5 million collectively with his duo Sate. Since we're talking about the World Cup qualifiers, we also need to mention the most underrated player during that time of the game, Chinken, who was by far the most underrated player of Season 9. Now, Chinken qualified 5 out of 5 times to the New York Finals in duos with his duo Stompy, who at the time was the best open tournament player worldwide. Unfortunately, in solo, Chinken wouldn't perform quite as good, but he still got super close in that he got 15th in week 3. The reason Chinken is in this spot and not Stompy is that he never got any recognition because people thought Stompy was just carrying. And although Stompy definitely pulled more than his own weight in this duo, Chinken was a fantastic partner. He knew exactly what he needed to do to ensure that Stompy was set up for success, and their results speak for themselves. In addition, they had a super interesting strat pretty much nobody else in the world had, and that was W-keying everyone that looked bad. That's right, if Stompy and Chinken saw a team that looked good, they simply didn't fight them, and if they saw a team that looked really bad, then they were W-keying right away, both in opens and in finals. And thanks to this strategy, they placed highly enough to qualify to New York every single time. The player that wraps up Chapter 1 and takes the title of most underrated of Season X is Macwood. Not only did he win the first FNCS ever during this season, but he also throughout the majority of Fortnite competitive has been one of the best and most underrated height players in the world. Additionally, during the World Cup Finals that was played in Season 9, him and Calc was able to win a game where he had 7 elims and Calc had 2, meaning he's also able to perform when it matters most. A quality that is crucial if you want to become a well-known name in the world of professional Fortnite. Another player who is able to perform when it matters most is Nate. He was actually so good to perform when it mattered that he carried Mongrel, Benji, and Wolfies during the Chapter 2 Season 1 FNCS Grand Finals. Now, what makes Nate my pick for the most underrated player from Season 1 was how he was able to consistently clutch up important situations as well as his near flawless aim. When it comes to keyboard and mouse aimers from Season 1, Nate was definitely in the conversation for the best in the world. In the following season, a young player by the name Janice stood out and performed insanely well seemingly out of nowhere. He went from placing 33rd in the Duos Grand Finals to winning the Solo FNCS Grand Finals in the very same season. Janice's story is truly incredible, and one that really goes to show that if you're willing to put in the hours and work hard to find the best practice possible, you can within the time span of a few months go from someone who's really not that good at all to one of the best players in your region. Now, of course, Janice had grinded an unhealthy amount of customs leading up to the Solo FNCS in Season 2. It was no accident that he took home the trophy, as his game sense during this time of the game was arguably at the very peak of what was possible at the time. And chances are high that his understanding of solos was not only the best in Europe, but the entire world during the entirety of Season 2. For Season 3, I've got the first controller player on this list, and that is none other than Coop. At this time, he was basically unstoppable. Not only did he win the solo FNCS on NA East, but he also won the online DreamHack solo tournament just 5 days later. For some reason, a lot of people were quick to judge Coop, saying that he only abused aim assist and that he wasn't actually a good player after his back-to-back tournament wins. But the funny thing was that none of these players that called Coop out had any FNCS wins, nor had they made 60k in 5 days from Fortnite either. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters in competitive Fortnite is the results you're able to take home. And Coop, during Season 3, took home some insanely impressive results, but unfortunately never got the credit he deserved for his skill at the time. So for that reason, he was a super easy pick for most underrated player of this season. Moving on to one of the most beloved seasons ever, Stark season. The player that went under the radar but still was an absolute animal was Rex. This guy played alongside Epic Whale and Arkram, and when you're playing with names as big as this, then it's hard to go in the spotlight. But during this season, Rex just didn't miss any max damages. He was quite literally the best aimer in North America. So no surprise, Rex, Arkram, and Epic was able to take home the FNCS trophy during this one. Nowadays, Rex does not play Fortnite at all, but he will go down in the history of the game as one of the most underrated players that have ever competed. Just like Jack, who was the most underrated player of Season 5. Now, Jack was actually so underrated that he for the majority of 2021 was first place on the PR leaderboards for NA East, without anyone knowing, or at least anyone giving him the recognition he deserved. You see, Jack didn't have a flashy and fast playstyle. No, he was very calm and extremely calculated. His way of winning tournaments was through being smart and minimizing mistakes to the highest possible standard. And I think that, coupled with the fact that he didn't do much social media at all, led to him simply being the most underrated player of Season 5. In the following season, however, Season 6, the most underrated player was actually a content creator, and that was Reverse 2K. Unfortunately for Reverse, the community actually thought he was heavily overrated at this time. 2 seasons prior, he was able to win his first FNCS with Day and Marrow. 2 young controller talents he had picked up and practiced a ton with in order to achieve what they had done together back then. In Season 5, they wouldn't quite be able to take home the trophy, but they placed a respectable 4th. So in Season 6, Reverse, Day, and Marrow locked in and took home first place yet again. After this win, seemingly everyone said that Day and Marrow had carried Reverse to his achievement. But what was funny was the fact that Day and Marrow would not have been anywhere near 2 times FNCS champs hadn't it been for Reverse picking them up in Stark season. Because the harsh truth is that their team game mode results prior to playing with Reverse were bad. Reverse had the ability to make 2 solo demons into 2 top tier teammates, a skill that no one but the very best IGLs in the world possess. Talking about solo demons, during Season 7 we had an event named the FNCS All-Stars, which was the first major solo tourney in quite some time. So naturally players, especially ones wanting to prove themselves, were grinding hard to ensure that they placed highly in this opportunity. And one player who was super underrated at the time, who went by the name Veno, put in more time than anyone else. You see, in seasons prior, Veno had just missed out on qualifying to Grands, and in the 1 Grand Finals he had appeared, he placed 20th, which wasn't a satisfying result at all for someone as competitive as him. So in Season 7, he decided it was time to put on a show. So he went and placed 2nd in All-Stars, coming from basically nothing. This is again a story showcasing how Fortnite is a game where you can truly go from 0 to hero, if you're willing to put in the work. The 2nd place came with a cool of $120k added to his bank account, again emphasizing just how much this game can change your life if you let it. For the final season of the best chapter of Fortnite, the most underrated player was, without a shadow of a doubt, Dukes. Dukes is an interesting player. In Season 7, he went from never having won any event other than a solo cash cup to winning his FNCS heat to qualify to the Grand Finals, and also winning the Grand Finals itself. If you were watching FNCS at this time, you'll remember the entire community questioning what was going on, because the trio of Dukes, Justice, and Users was by no means a trio that was known to be good. In the tournaments leading up to this Grands, they had honestly placed pretty terribly, especially if we're looking at these placements from the POV of potential Grand Finals winners. Now, when this trio was able to take home the trophy, there was a very clear best player in the trio, one that was pulling his own weight times 3, and that was of course Dukes. After he was able to showcase his incredible skill this season, he got picked up by Buga and Mero for Season 8, and the most important tournament tournament of the entire chapter, namely Grand Royale. This trio would go on to absolutely dominate their region and easily take home the win, making Dukes a 2-time FNCS champ, all whilst being the most underrated player in the world. Hopping into the first season of Chapter 3, my pick is Snacky. Now, if you're from the west coast of North America, then this pick might seem incredibly weird, as Snacky was very famous on NA West. However, worldwide, he never got the recognition he deserved for being one of the best mechanical players at this time. Snacky actually ended up winning FNCS during Season 1, much thanks to his lightning-fast mechanics and confident way of playing. Nowadays, Snacky is still playing and doing so at a high level. However, it's safe to say that his prime was during Season 1 of Chapter 3. Next up, we have Season 2, and at this time, the most underrated player was Peterbot, and obviously, nowadays, he's one of the most hyped players in the world, and for good reason. He is absolutely insane at the time of me making this video, probably the best player in the world, and it's hard to imagine a player like him ever being underrated, but that was very much the case going into Season 2. You see, although Peterbot had quite a lot of tournament success before the season, he was widely recognized as someone who was one of the very best in the world in creative, but although very good in game, not quite in the category of Tier 1 players. But at the end of Season 2, everything changed when he was able to win the FNCS Grand Finals with none other than Baila. Ever since this win, Peterbot's skill level somehow seemed to be climbing, and the way he plays the game today is extremely fun to watch. And because of his inhumanly fast builds and edits, few players are able to come close to matching his very playstyle. Moving on, I had to search up the definition of underrated, and what popped up was Commandment during Season 3. Now, Commandment has been around since the very beginning of the game, always doing pretty good in competitive, but never really being someone a lot of people talk about. I think the reason Commandment is so underrated is because he really does not enjoy making content at all by the looks of it. He has 2 videos on YouTube, streams maybe once a year, and posts on his Twitter every year on his birthday, and that's it. It seems like Commandment just does his job of being one of the best Fortnite players ever, and nothing more. Something I 1000% respect him a lot for. Another player I have a lot of respect for is Quald. Now, Quald during Chapter 3 Season 4 was unreal. He was clutching situations at the 2022 Invitational that not even veteran pro players would have come close to winning, making impact plays and moving consistently and seemingly not missing a shot through the most important tournament of his career. Something that ended in an impressive 3rd place finish from one of the worst possible spots on the map. Quald, much like Peterbot, used to be known as a creative demon that didn't really perform super well in game, but that was until Scented gave him a chance at the end of 2021. Quald took this opportunity to really put on a show, and them playing together ended in a 1st place finish in a duo cash cup over on NA West, when both Quald and Scented played on high ping, and the rest is history. For Chapter 4 Season 1, the player I've picked as most underrated is Murstache, and again, hear me out. Murstache is for some reason never included in talks about who the best player in the world is, and especially during Chapter 4 Season 1, I thought this was super weird, due to just how good Murstache was playing. So although Murstache is very well known, he was underrated simply because he wasn't in the discussion for best player in the world during the span of the Hammer season. What I think makes Murstache so uniquely good is that he doesn't have an ego like so many other players. So in Tier 1 professional play, he is by far the best support player ever. He's not afraid to let his duo do the heavy lifting and support when needed. But of course, when he has to step up and do a solo clutch, he's also amazing at that. Talking about support players, I also would say much of the same applies to Edgy, the most underrated player of Season 2. Edgy is a player who has been around forever and always been very close or at the very top. In Season 2, Edgy was actually so good to the point where he won FNCS alongside Dukes. One of the most low-key FNCS wins ever looking back at it, as both of these players don't do anything crazy on socials, even when they get placements people dream of. But I guess that's also why they are both criminally underrated. I think another attribute that makes Edgy such an amazing player is his mindset when it comes to competitive. By the look of things, he's very open to criticism, and although they probably wouldn't include rages in their YouTube videos, I've never seen Edgy be mad after going down in a match. Something that definitely comes in handy in 12-game tournaments like an FNCS Grand Final. For Season 3, we have the first and only player from Asia, and that is none other than Swizzy. Even though Swizzy is from Asia, he no longer plays in that region, as he moved to Europe and is now grinding to be the best player he can be here. In Season Season 3, this was also something he managed to do, as he was able to take home the win alongside Putrick during this one, and he was by far the star player in the duo. Swizzy is a mechanical mastermind, and someone who is consistently putting in the hours to try to become the best. So long term, I think we'll see a lot more of him in major tournaments. On the topic of major tournaments, during Season 4 of Chapter 4, we of course had the Global Championship, and I think everyone can guess what player I picked for the most underrated player throughout the season. Cooper, of course. Just like Swizzy, Cooper is someone who stands out mechanically. His builds and edits are lightning fast, and even in laggy endgames, he's able to pull off moves normal people can't even do in creative. After the 2023 Global Championship win, Cooper has stayed good, but during this era of Fortnite, he was different, arguably being one of the hardest players to fight in the world. And for the final season of Chapter 4, Season OG, the most underrated player was Nebs. Nebs is someone who has never gotten the recognition he deserves, although he is a fantastic player. Much like many others on this list, Nebs does not care about social media. He cares about doing a good job when it comes to performing in important tournaments like FNCS Grand Finals, and he consistently does exactly that. Nebs is actually one of the best aimers in the world, especially when it comes to using spray weapons like SMGs and ARs, as well as hitting shots nobody else would hit in laggy tournament lobbies. And I think that with time, we will see Nebs winning a big tournament, because he really is that good. And finally, for the final chapter of Fortnite, Chapter 5, the most underrated player of Season 1 was Marius Cow. Although he gained a ton of mainstream popularity throughout this season, Marius was widely recognized in the pro community for his insane fighting skill in creative. Before he popped off in comp, he was beating, so to say, every single professional in 1v1s, 2v2s, whatever it may be, with his fast and unique way of utilizing his mechanics. Marius, being nothing more than 17 years old, probably has a long career ahead of him, and he is definitely one of the future tier 1s of competitive Fortnite. The final season we're going to be talking about today is Season 2, the season we're in right now, and the most underrated player in the world is Agers. Now, considering he is playing with Bugha, some might argue that he is not underrated at all, but I still think he deserves a lot of credit for how good he has been the last couple of years, because this guy is really one of the best to ever do it. Top tier awareness, lightning fast mechs, and insanely consistent aim are all attributes that describe Agers. So it will be super interesting to see how he and Bugha perform in this weekend's FNCS Grand Final. Now, all that remains is for one of you guys watching to become good enough to be in my next video going over the most underrated players in the world. Thanks for watching.